find such a love at our age. Whoever thought we could dance on a...
Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I'm your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Hello, Judy, and hello, viewers and listeners. What is today's episode all about?
What the heck is self-love anyway? An interview with Jonathon Aslay.
And that we just finished, as we are wont to do. We just finished the interview, and that's when we make these little intros. And it was great. That was a lot of fun.
We had a lot of fun with Jonathon.
Really fun conversation, and he's thoughtful and knowledgeable and fun, and it's all about relationships, and he works a lot with... I guess we didn't go into too much about specifically his work with women, but his work with all sorts of folks,
Right.
women and men, especially in midlife.
Right.
Sort of that's his niche in particular. So do check that out. And before you check that out, go pick up all 4 of our books. Talk about yours first.
Okay, why don't we talk about The Blue Tent, Erotic Tales from the Bible. It takes actual biblical stories, and based on the stories and interpretations of the stories, goes into great sexual detail about the lives of some of the Adam and Eve, Sarah and Abraham, Jacob, Leah and Rachel. You know that.
A lot of the greatest the greatest characters,
All the greatest characters, and they had to have sex,
They did, and you
Larry
wrote about it.
Zilber goes into great detail about it.
And Larry Zilber is Judy's alter ego.
Yes, she is.
So you can find that any place you can find books. And let me spell Larry Zilber for those of you who aren't seeing it on the screen. LARIAZYLBER. LarryZilber.com will get you there. You can go onto Amazon and search for The Blue Tent, Erotic Tales from the Bible. If you just say The Blue Tent, you will get Blue Tents. And you don't want a Blue Tent. You want her beautiful book, The Blue Tent, Erotic Tales from the Bible. How about my books?
How about your books? Betrayal and Forgiveness. That's one that we talked about. How to navigate the turmoil and learn to trust again.
Yep.
And we also talk quite a bit about It's Not About Communication, why everything you know about couples therapy is wrong.
Yeah, and when you say we talk about it in the interview you're about to see, we just had that interview. We did talk about that.
And reigniting the spark, why stable relationships lose intimacy and how to get it back. And we also talk about that.
We did, and so you should immediately go, before you even watch the rest of this episode, which is wonderful. You should stay around for it. But first, pause the recording and go and buy all those books, and buy them in all 3 formats.
Paperback?
Yes.
Audio? Ebook?
Yes, and you can buy them in all those formats.
And you narrate yours, and I narrate mine.
Absolutely. So I hope you will do that. And I will say, before we often say this at the tail end, but I want to say it even before we get into the interview. If you have suggestions for topics you would like us to address, Judy, how should people do that?
You can go to our website, ctn7.com, CT as in couples therapy, in 7, number 7.com.
ctn7.com. You can let us know what you'd like us to talk about, suggest yourself or someone else as a guest. And I do want to mention one of our upcoming episodes, it may be a few weeks from now, but one of our upcoming episodes, we will be covering a listener question that came in the last couple of weeks. And if you have questions of things in your own life you think it would be interesting for us to talk about, we're not offering you therapy in this podcast, but we'll talk about stuff if you think it's interesting. We'd be happy to do that. I also will put in a plug for my practice. If you would like my help with couples issues, go to brucechalmer.com and you will see all about my practice. And if you want to get in touch with me through that, you should feel free to do so. And so without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Our guest today is Jonathon Aslay. Jonathon is a dating and relationship coach who works primarily with women over 40, in addition to helping his clients understand men and how they function in relationships. Jonathon works with his clients to find happiness from within, whether or not they are in a romantic relationship. After losing his 19-year-old son Connor in 2018, Jonathon's grief led him on a soul-searching journey where he became aware of an often overlooked dimension of the dating conversation. He realized that the dating process reveals a common emotional health issue faced by many singles seeking a partner. lack of self worth, self regard, and self love. Today, he seeks to encourage both men and women to fully love themselves. He has written a book, What the Heck is Self Love Anyway? And he also offers a midlife love mastery mentorship program. Jonathan, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm excited to be here, Judy and Bruce.
Well, we're delighted to have you. We always like to ask our guests for starters, how did you get into the work you do? Tell us something about your own journey.
It's interesting. Nobody goes to college or goes to school saying they're going to become a dating or relationship coach. I'll try to give the Cliff Note version. After turning 40 and going through a divorce in 2005, I found myself out in the dating marketplace. And back then, online dating was kind of the Wild West. And so you could simply plug in exactly what you'd want, and someone would magically appear. And I went out on a date with somebody. It was a really nice date, but something wasn't right. And then a couple days later, I'd meet someone else. Nice date, something wasn't right. And again. And actually, in 1 year, I had over 100 internet dates.
Wow.
And I realized that the something wasn't right was me. I was the common denominator. So I started to study relationships. I bought relationship books at that time. But what was fascinating is that I was communicating with women, oftentimes not even going on dates. I was so kind of addicted to hearing other people share their stories about their divorces, about raising children. And unbeknownst to me, it was a sort of therapy. But what was happening is I made so many friends, and women would reach out to me, Jonathan, would you look at my dating profile and tell me how to make it better? And I'm like, okay, and I give them some advice. And then a month later, they go, I met a really great guy. Would you look at his profile and tell me what you think about him? And that was really the birth of how I evolved into a dating and relationship coach. I used to give women advice from the male perspective, particularly the divorced man and the emotional effects of going through a divorce as I was experiencing it. And it's just evolved in the last 15 years from that starting point of how I kind of fell into this business.
Mm.
So I'm going to quote your book and ask you, what the heck is self love anyway?
It's funny because the word self-love, I think when I say it's funny, I mean, it's not funny in that my book is a journey of personal development, self-help, spiritual work, and inviting people to do therapy to heal, as you shared in my bio, what I believe is the number one emotional health wound is I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not likable. And the word self-love is really encompasses self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, self-reliance, self-discipline, all those words encompassing in love. And it's really an invitation to shore up like our emotional scaffolding. So when we experience, as you shared in my bio, when my son passed away, I didn't completely collapse because I built up emotional scaffolding well before he passed away.
Mm. That one of the things I talk about a lot. As you know, our podcast is called Couples Therapy in 7 Words. Actually, you can hold up the merch if you want to show the. We have the 7 words on a cup, of course. Be kind, don't panic, and have faith. And
Yeah.
what you were describing, that the sense of self-love, as you were describing it in quite a broad way, I lumped together in that word faith. It's that basic sense that reality is right to be what it is. And, I can only imagine, well, we can share a little of our story, the loss of your son. I can
Yeah.
only imagine what that's like. We are currently going through something where my 39-year-old son had a horrible accident involving a rock climbing, and a rock fell on his head, and he's been
Oh,
in a coma and a minimally conscious state for almost 2 months now, or 6 weeks.
7 weeks.
So, we're of course very, very worried about it. But, my heart goes out to you to have lost your son. And it was an accident, I think you said it was.
yeah, it was an accident.
Yeah, which I just not that the matter makes that much of a difference, but what did you learn from that? And I also noticed in your book some beautiful quotes you gave, some lessons you learned from him, when he was alive. But I'm curious if you
Yeah.
could speak to that.
So it's interesting when I was so what happened in his particular case, I recognize, the stages of grief that we all go through, whether it's denial, anger, depression. I was able to accept it fairly quickly, and which helped ground me. In other words, I didn't go into bargaining, trying to
Mm.
like, oh, this didn't happen. And it's interesting because my ex-wife, and by the way, I'm divorced to his mother, we were each other's support person through all this, and we kind of reached a state of acceptance fairly quickly.
Mm.
Why I'm bringing this up is when I gave his eulogy, I stopped in the middle and I said, everybody, we can grieve with suffering or we can grieve with love.
Hmm.
And why I chose that is, instead of, like, I recognize that he's no longer, in my existence, on a daily basis, on a physical sense. But I said I can either, feel like I've missed out, or I can celebrate his life. That's what grieving with love meant to me, was celebrating his life, being in a state of appreciation. And certainly I feel the sadness of him no longer here. I miss him, but I choose to celebrate his life. And so when I was writing my book, I was thinking of some of the lessons he taught me. And he was a very, he's one of those kids that, when they say beats to their own drum, he was
Hmm.
one of those kids. He beat to his own drum. And he had this unusual practice, like, he didn't allow other people's opinion of him affect his emotional well-being. I don't know how else to describe it, but the chapter in my book is "Don't F with your chi," was
Yeah.
was based on him. And
And I
and
have to say that's amazing at any age, but especially for a teenager to have that
yes.
kind of self confidence and a sense of self. It's amazing.
Well, now I will say this as I unpack it much deeper after writing the book, and the book is now 5 years old. I don't know if it was just an avoidant attachment style that he was experiencing and repressing his emotions,
Who
like I,
knows?
but
Yeah.
but it's kind of like along the lines of the four agreements, is people's projection, opinions of you as their projection, kind of. But it's just the awareness that when somebody is, projecting on you, it's on them, not on you, kind of thing, is what that chapter is about, is really kind of a four agreements kind of perception. Um, you know, Certainly we can look at, let me rewind. Let me give you a little backstory. When I was going through my divorce, I lost my high-end corporate job, and I got wiped out in the market crash of 2008. And I'm going through this emotional
Mm.
trauma of divorce, or the
Mm.
unraveling of the tapestry of your life with another human being. And I was probably in the pit of despair for 5 years. And my online dating was kind of my drug of choice, to be quite candid with you.
Mm.
It
Yeah.
was a way to, emotionally distract me from the pain I was experiencing. Why I'm sharing this, for the next 5 to 10 years after that was when I began doing work on myself. So by the time, as I said earlier, by the time he passed away, I had already had this emotional scaffolding. And not to suggest that, diminishes any person, any parent who's lost a child. The way I was able to navigate is, I was in severe pain well before that. And I
Hmm.
worked on myself. That's why I'm such a big proponent of personal development, self-help, spiritual work, and therapy for people, so they can shore up their emotional well-being. So like when you say faith, like, that's part of it, is I trust now. I'm in a state of faith that I didn't have
Yeah.
years before my collapse, if you will.
That
Mhm.
is certainly, when I've worked with folks, and my most recent book is about betrayal and forgiveness. And
Okay.
betrayal, of course, is one of those awful situations. And look, seems to me, I talk about three steps to forgiveness, the third one being forgive God. And we're not fundamentalists. I'm not even talking about God as anthropomorphic God, but that
Yeah.
notion that, if you lose a child, or in our situation, this horrible accident that happened to this kid that no one deserves it, but he especially didn't deserve it. He's a wonderful kid. Anyway, he's
Yeah.
39 years old with two kids, but when that happens, who do you get mad at? I mean, I suppose I could get mad at God, but what good does that do? But that sense of being of going through something like that is such a great teacher if you can get through it. And I've worked with so many people who've been through various kinds of betrayals, various
Yeah.
kinds of pain, much along the lines you're talking about. And when they can come through it, they're grateful for the experience. I've never had anybody say, to their partner, "Hey, thanks for cheating." I've never heard that one. I have,
Yeah.
I have heard lots of people say, in effect, "Thanks for precipitating a crisis. Apparently, we needed one."
Well, I
You
think,
still shouldn't have done it, but we're better off now.
yeah, it's interesting because again, and by the way, let me give you a big hug for your son, because,
Mm,
I'm sending him a lot of healing juju as I give that hug.
thank you. Yeah.
Um, betrayal is an interesting one because with the loss of my son, it wasn't something that happened to me. It actually happened to him.
Hmm.
Now, I don't know if that's a rationalization on my part, but I'm aware enough to go, okay, that was something that happened to him. His life no longer ceases in the way. And again, I miss him. But betrayal feels like something different. It feels like something done to you.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm not saying that's what it is. It's just that's what it feels like. It's really a loss of trust. Like and that
Absolutely.
from an emotional perspective could easily have more emotional damage than what I've just described. And again, I'm not comparing them. I'm just
No,
merely
I know what
saying
you mean.
I
No, I
think
don't
this
think
is
I
the
would
hard
put
part
death
to
in a betrayal category.
what's
No,
that?
I said I don't think I would put death in a betrayal category.
yeah.
I don't
No,
think
I'm
that's
not
what we're
doing that,
talking about.
Well, other than God
but I think
betraying us, but yeah,
Well,
but
not the
on an
same thing.
emotional level, it could possibly feel, I mean, to a certain person, it could feel worse, is all I'm just saying.
oh God,
Person
yeah.
processes loss a different way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I feel like betrayal feels like it's happening to you
Mm-hmm.
versus it happened to someone else. I'm just
Right.
speculating here. I'm not,
Hmm.
No,
you know,
that's true.
yeah. Um, and then from a relationship standpoint, because we give our trust to another human being, oftentimes to fallible human beings, that's the real tricky part of this.
Yeah.
Because infidelity, when someone's cheating, it's because they're fallible. And then we give trust to a fallible human being.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. I've often noted that people who have managed to go through something like that and come out the other side with appreciation for the learning,
Yeah.
whether or not they stay together with a person, I point out in my book, you can forgive someone in the sense of giving up on having to be angry with them and still
Sure.
not trust them, in which case you probably don't want to stay together with them. But I've worked with folks who have forgiven in that sense and have decided to split up. And I've worked actually with a lot of folks who have forgiven in that sense and decided to stay together and rebuild trust. And what they learn through that process often is their previous thinking that no one could ever hurt them that way was faulty from the start. It was an illusion from the start. And that's a
Yeah.
valuable lesson. And going through tragedy, it sure is a life lesson. If you go along thinking, "Oh, that could never happen," and then it happens, it sure does teach you something. And that turns out to be
Oh,
valuable.
yeah, I mean the idea of permanence, changes in a blink of an eye. So, and it's caused me to be more appreciative of every moment, and certainly even be more mindful when I'm people that I care about. Is to, one thing my son who passed away, Connor, and we had a habit from the time his mother and I divorced is we always gave each other a hug and kiss, "I love you," as our last physical contact with each other. I mean, it was like that was a very habitual thing we did. I did with
Mm.
both my boys. So on some level, my last memory of him is a hug and kiss, "I love you."
Oh, that's very
Um,
sweet. Yeah.
and so now I embrace that even more with everybody in my life. Every person that matters to me, I make a conscious choice to end a physical connection that way.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Um, and so, but coming back to betrayal, uh, I want to piggyback on something you said because I truly believe couples who can overcome betrayal and rebuild their relationship, and let's even say call it a fair proof their relationship, have oftentimes a much stronger bond. They went through hell in that period of time, but what they comes out at the other end can actually be a loving, caring, more conscious, intentional relationship. So that's I think the lesson I also learned is that through my hell periods of time where I've been in hell, is I've come out at heaven at the other end.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I mean, for lack of a better word, I mean,
Sure.
I'm, yeah.
So you deal primarily with midlife couples or singles, I should say,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so do you find what's the commonality that you find among people of a certain age?
Well, I mean, okay, you just opened up a can of worms that could take hours upon hours to discussing. So I'll
We'll
try to
take the Cliff
condense it.
Note version.
Okay, so how long have the two of you been together?
Well, 20 years.
20
We're
years.
also a
20 years.
second midlife.
Okay, but how did
We,
you two meet really quickly? Just
well, you
We
mentioned
have episode on
you,
that actually,
you
but go
mentioned
ahead.
you
oh,
mentioned online dating. We met on
okay.
online
So
dating.
interesting enough, if we go back 30 years ago when online dating exists prior to online dating, most people met through their social circle, through their friends, their family, their work. In fact, most of the time, whomever you mated with was not a stranger.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
We are in unique times where we're meeting. And by the way, online dating now represents 65% of where new couples are
Yeah.
meeting
Oh,
today.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
And you
we
guys were
moved in common circles, so we had overlap in our circles and would have been
okay.
introduced. But
So
nevertheless, your point is well taken.
yeah, so the more you had, well, the thing is, if they're not, if you have this some familiarity or commonalities, it's a good
Yeah.
place to start from. Today, one of the challenges we're meeting total strangers, number one.
Mhm.
Number two, for that over 45 category, roughly 75% of singles are divorced. We have some widows in there and some never married in that category as well. Okay. So of the divorce, there's an emotional trauma that occurs when two people separate their lives. And oftentimes you have a lot of people in the dating marketplace who haven't healed from their adult wounds, let alone not healed their childhood wounds. And that's a whole nother conversation to as well. So we have a wounded population, and I let me differentiate between real real severe trauma of abuse or that sort of thing versus garden variety, emotional trauma.
Mm-hmm.
If we haven't worked on our stuff, what happens is we go into a new relationship, number one. We haven't worked on our past stuff, and we find ourselves in new relationships bouncing off of each other on an emotional level. And this is why second and third marriages actually end at much higher rates than first marriages.
Hmm.
Um,
I do have, before I was a psychologist, I was a statistician. And I
okay.
actually also have a statistical understanding of that, which I could go and I'll try and be very brief, but I'll throw
Yeah.
it just for, you may find it interesting. One of the reasons statistically that second marriages are going to have a higher divorce rate than first is that if you just think about that, the very group of people you described, that
Yeah.
cohort of people who've been divorced once, and this is a gross overgeneralization. There are two reasons why people got divorced, grossly overgeneralizing.
Yeah.
Two
Yeah.
reasons why people got divorced the first time. One is they were just, it didn't work out. They were with the wrong person. They didn't have the skills yet, whatever. That's most people. The
Yeah.
other is there's a subset of that group that should never marry anybody because it's never going to work. And there's a subset. It's a small subset, but it's a subset. And statistically, that's a larger subset of the group of people who are divorced than it is of the original population. And so just for that reason, you're going to get a higher rate of divorce.
See, now I thought the two primary causes for divorce, and now I'm curious now, was usually financial issues, money issues,
Mhm.
or intimacy, whether it's physical or emotional intimacy. I thought those were the two most common reasons for divorce.
Well, I'm talking about what I'm saying isn't different from that. I'm saying that if you just look at the characteristics of the people
Oh, got it,
themselves,
got it, got it.
that there are people who can handle people who get divorced because of those various reasons, those being, yes, two major reasons why people get divorced.
Yeah.
But there is that subset of people, and again, it's not huge, but it's big enough to skew the statistics. There's a subset of people, which you've probably encountered, I certainly have in my work, It's like, oh my God, you may be a fine person, but you shouldn't try to be in a monogamous relationship. It's simply not going to work, for
Yeah.
a variety of reasons. And, and I say that oddly enough, I'm not trying to be like super judgmental in saying that. I'm just observing there's some folks, it appears, there's nature and there's nurture, and we're in the nurture business, not the nature
Yeah.
business. The longer
Yeah.
I've done it, the more respect I have for nature. There's there's some folks out there, it's like, wrong culture. It's like you
Well,
shouldn't try to be
because
in a
the
monogamous
need,
culture. It isn't going to work. Yeah.
well, the need to be in, if we look at human pair bonding, the need to be in a relationship from a survival perspective doesn't exist to the same degree as it did hundreds, if not thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
So when we look at relationships today, the need to be in a fully committed relationship with someone isn't as prevalent as it was. And particularly in midlife, what makes it challenging is the blueprint most of us grew up with, us baby boomers or Gen Xers, was, for most part, at least this was my blueprint, was go to college, get a job, meet a girl, get married, buy a house, start a family. There was a purpose to a relationship that was centered around making babies and raising a children. For
Mhm.
Absolutely.
midlife folks, most couples don't know what their purpose is, and they struggle with blending lives. And the TV show Brady Bunch made it
Oh
look
God.
pretty easy. These I mean, they gave you a false sense of how to blend lives together, which
Hmm.
Carol Brady didn't work, and she had a maid who lived there. Well,
Yeah.
that's not reality,
We
amongst
did a
other things.
podcast episode on that early on. We did one where the thesis was the Brady Bunch has done more to damage relationships than anything else, or something like that. It was some
I have a blog on
hyperbole.
that exact same thing.
There we
So,
go.
so midlife folks don't know how to integrate their lives. And what's happened today, Judy and Bruce, is that now it's birthed new relationships. So let me give you the new relationships that exist. Hooking up is a form of relationship.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Friends with benefits is a form of relationship. Situationships is a form of relationships, and casual relationships, which can include some level of monogamy and exclusivity, but they're very little teamwork or no all in. So
Mm.
serious relationships have teamwork and all in as levels of commitment. Today I'm observing, and by the way, this is all anecdotal on my part. I don't have the statistical facts to back this up, so let me just be clear. I believe casual relationships now will be outnumbering serious relationships in the very near future.
Mhm. You certainly see some. It's funny. It's not like I have all the statistics in the back of my head just because I was trained as a statistician, But
Yeah.
I've noted a couple interesting ones. The proportion of babies born to unmarried mothers in Europe is now considerably over half. It's at very close to half in the United States. And
Wow, really?
yeah, and a lot of those, what's interesting to me with respect to what we're talking about, it's not just because, the woman got knocked up, so to speak. It's because a lot of times the woman is partnered and often lives with the father of the child, but they've elected not to get married. And there's a message there. I think, very similar to what you're describing, that there's a lot, and of course, I see this in my work with couples a lot. There's a lot of folks who aren't all in. It is very much contingent and situational.
Well, well, let's examine something for a second, because I struggle. Like, by the way, I've been married, I'm divorced, and I'd like to get remarried. I'm just not sure I want a relationship with the government. Okay, because that's what marriage is today. It's really a relationship with the government that gives them control, and I'm not sure I want that. I certainly would be open to a ketubah or a spiritual marriage or something that is defined, but I'm not sure I want a relationship with the government. And my
Uh,
point is this is tricky, right? Because I can understand people that don't get married but live together in some sort of agreement with one another. I don't know where the happy medium is,
mm.
in what can have significance but without the government being
Yeah,
involved.
it's funny. We have a ketubah, a literal
Okay.
ketubah, and in fact, one of the people who would have introduced us is the rabbi who ended up marrying us because he knew us
Okay.
both separately. But that phenomenon of involving the government, I tend to try and redeem that to an extent, because if you think about the whole idea of a ketubah, it is an agreement for the protection, primarily the woman traditionally,
Yes.
and it is an agreement that is recognizing And that's the other, the symbolism of a Jewish marriage. The chuppah has open sides. And the idea is, yeah, everybody's got a piece of you. It's when you get married, that's one of the things I wrote about in one of my books, that
Yeah.
the reason to get married is not for the legal protections per se or the legal hindrances per se, but because it's about more than just the two of you. When you decide to get married, you are quite deliberately saying, okay, this has now become everybody else's business too. So
Yeah.
I don't, so if that includes the government and the government says, okay, then we're going to make rules that are different for married people than for people who aren't married, I can see why there's social reasons for doing that historically.
No, I get that. I just, this is where I think couples are now reevaluating
Hmm.
what is a serious relationship. Is it
Yes.
marriage? Is it living together? Is it a prenup? Is it a ketubah? And these are great conversations to have. I think, however, going back to what I said before, we're seeing a lot more casual relationships with little or no agreements with one another,
Yep.
maybe monogamy and exclusivity, but no real depth. And I think from a societal perspective, I think it hurts us from a societal perspective.
Hmm.
And so, you know, these are, here's the beauty of these, are like our conversation. I hope we're expanding consciousness here. That's my hope, is someone listens to this or watches this and says, God, maybe I'm going to really think about this instead of naively entering into a relationship. Because here's the dilemma we're faced with. We're, at least my perception, is we've been indoctrinated in believing that chemistry equals relationship success.
Right.
Mm. Yep.
And really, it's shared values, shared vision, blendable lifestyles, and emotional maturity that is the foundation for relationship success. Just
Hmm.
chemistry is the Kickstarter. But we have a lot of people jumping into relationships based on chemistry. And as you
Right.
said earlier, have no business being in a relationship with
Yeah,
Yeah.
somebody.
yeah. It's so interesting when you talk about emotional maturity. I'm
Yeah.
thinking about David Schnarch. I don't know if you remember his stuff, but he died a few years ago. But he was I think he didn't call himself a sex therapist per se, but wrote a lot
Okay.
about sex in couples. And one
Okay.
of his things that he points out is, even I'm paraphrasing him here, even the chemistry, if you want it to last, involves emotional maturity. He would go
Yes.
around and give talks, and he would ask his audience, okay, at what age do you think men and women respectively reach their sexual peak? And the usual answers would be, like men in their 20s, women in their 30s, or whatever. And he would say, no, both men and women reach their sexual peak in their 60s and 70s. And they would
Mm,
look and say, "What? What is that? That can't, the hormones are ebbing, and that can't be true." Well, he was talking specifically about emotional maturity. He said to tolerate desire, to tolerate the anxiety involved in deeply desiring someone, and then
yeah.
enacting that is requires a lot of maturity. It's my shtick that I'm always saying, and I'm always telling couples, and I put in my books about,
Yeah.
the chief skill of intimacy is to tolerate anxiety. And I got some of that language from Schnarch.
Well, let me ask you something, and I'm curious to hear what you think, because I suspect a lot of Masters and Johnson and King's, who's the
Kinsey.
other,
Kinsey.
King's Kinsey.
Kinsey.
Yeah.
Please forgive me. I mispronounced it. I suspect a lot of their studies were based on a much younger demographic. I don't think they were, bringing in 50 and 60-year-olds in their in their studies. I don't know the answer to that, but I suspect it's a lot of 20 and 30-year-olds. And I think to really have valid data, you have to almost look at every age bracket, even in the 70s and
Yeah.
80s, to really get a sense of, particularly in the area of sex,
Yeah.
studies. So,
I think Kinsey did, because it was a broader survey. He was
okay,
basically surveying people. I think Masters and Johnson more likely didn't, because they were actually bringing in people and observing them having sex. So it was different
exactly,
kind of
exactly.
research.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious, because and a lot of our perceptions are based on a lot of primal understanding of human behavior, whether it's men are provider protectors and women are nurturers and all this kind of stuff. But what I don't observe in a lot of studies about human pair bonding, at least from my perspective, isn't the emotional trauma they experienced in childhood, the emotional trauma they might have experienced in their adulthood. A lot of perceptions are based on primal, like even caveman type of things, and versus really understanding the totality of an individual and all of their life experiences, because every individual is unique and different too. So
Mhm.
I just mean in the stereotypical sense of what's talked about in human pair bonding.
Right, and I don't think those assumptions hold any as much anymore as they once did. So it's
Yes.
hard to navigate when the rules change mid-game.
Yeah. And this is where behavioral psychology and that these conversations, like I'm always questioning everything, because every individual has, we have all this, like we're we have all these scripts that were written when we were younger, and then they've evolved, like code in a computer program. And so by the time you become a fully curated human being, let's just say even at 50 years old, there's a lot of scripts in there affecting how you navigate as an individual. So my point in bringing this all up is general dating advice is, I give a lot of general dating advice, but what I'm encouraging everyone to do is get granular to themselves to really understand what was it you said? Be kind. What was it, the second
Don't
one?
panic
Don't panic and have
and
faith.
have faith.
Like that's a great recipe, I believe, for living life and operating from that perspective.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's really. Of course, I think of it less as a recipe per se, and more of sort of a description. It's sort of like, well,
Okay.
great. How am I supposed to do that? It does take.
Yeah.
I've written books about it. It's like, I can't summarize it in 7 words, but it is. There are three things that fit together. Those three different principles, because be kind in the sense of kinship.
Yeah.
That when you feel kin with someone, that's when you want to stay together with them, and
Yeah.
you can't do that if you're in a panic. And then the problem was, well, okay, how am I not supposed to panic? Well, I don't have a simple formula for how to not panic except to observe that if you have faith in the sense I described it, that's the antidote. It's that sense of, well, there's something right about this life business. It's an attitude toward life that says there's something right about this universe, even though it's painful sometimes. Even the pain is based on some stuff that apparently needs to be there. So I got to work with it
Yeah.
rather than, I'm certainly going to try and reduce the pain, but I also got to recognize there's, we couldn't design a world that didn't have it. It wouldn't work. We couldn't
Yeah.
design life that didn't have death in it. It wouldn't work. And death sucks, but we kind of have to accept the reality of it or it just wouldn't work.
So I'm going to share something with your audience. Please don't judge me. So when my son passed away, I actually did a psilocybin journey,
Mm,
to get a sense of what I really wanted to understand death in a whole new way. And it was in a ceremony with a shaman, or a guide, I should say, a husband and wife. And since then, I've done 30, if not 40 ceremonies in the last 5 to 6 years. And in some of my most recent experience, I've experienced ego death, like complete dissolution of my reality, which
mm.
is really fascinating to witness. I mean, if you can, like, there was the participant that was experiencing this and the audience member that was experiencing this. Why I'm sharing this with everyone is I believe when we begin to really tap into our emotions and our experiences, both as the person who's experiencing it, but the observer of it, and really tap into faith, or trust is what I typically say. When I can really trust that everything is going to be okay, even when I die.
Hmm.
Like that's the message. That was one of the gifts that losing my son brought me, is this whole awareness around the fear of death, and really being able to embrace it from a place of trust or faith has changed my life dramatically,
Wow.
in a,
Yeah.
in a good way. Let me be
Yeah,
clear, in a
Absolutely.
good way.
Yeah. No, that I have heard similar things from other folks, and I had one experience when I was, I think, 19, of
Okay.
what I believed to be mescaline. God knows what it was back then. This was
Okay.
in the 1960s, but I was told that's what it was. I think I did it a total of 3 times, maybe it's just twice. Anyway, the first time was very much that kind of experience, ego dissolution. It
Yeah.
was a life-changing experience. Then I had one that was bad, and I stopped doing it. It's like,
Yeah.
not going there, but because I think it was laced with
But
speed or
now it's
something.
guided, so it's
But
different.
oh yeah, with
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
And you know what you're getting.
And you do know what you're getting, and it is, and indeed, there are folks who are doing a lot of work on this, as you
Yeah,
know. There's a
Well,
lot of,
now
yeah,
psychedelic therapy, I know it's underground, but ketamine therapy and other
oh
forms
yeah,
of therapy has had profound effects on individuals because it opens portals in
sure.
my purview
yeah.
of
Our podcast just a few
We
weeks ago,
recently interviewed somebody who
Stephen
has
Radowitz,
yeah,
Dr. Stephen
that is
Radowitz.
oh, okay.
Yeah,
a clinic in New York where they do that.
they do
Yeah,
ketamine
so
therapy. Yeah.
this is something I can only speak for myself and the profound growth I've had as an individual because it opens portals into awareness and consciousness that is difficult to do by mere meditation. As a friend of mine says, doing these modalities is like it's like meditation on a for using a Ferrari instead of a walker.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
not to
That's
suggest meditation for a lot of people can reach these states of consciousness, but it
mhm.
certainly expedites it in a way that's unique. And and this kind of begs the question, for this entire conversation, I always think, what's this journey of life? Is it mating with someone else? Is it, what, I recognize that experiencing our emotions is part of what this journey is all about. And I use the dating and relationship conversation as a catalyst to encourage people to really get to know who they are on the inside
Yeah.
beyond our programming of go to college, get a job, meet somebody, get married, buy a house, and start a family.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think there's nothing like a relationship that, it's one of the reasons, aside from my own general orientation. I mean, the story I tell is, I liked being married even when I was in a bad marriage. I like it a
Yeah.
lot better in a good one, but there's some people that just seem to be the marrying kind, and I guess I'm one, I'm a one-woman man, one at a time, and
Yeah.
here we are. But that phenomenon that in a relationship, it confronts you with stuff that I don't know. It's one of the best ways of confronting you with those very
Yeah,
questions you're
exactly.
saying. It's like, wow, because it turns out, we are, most of us, wired to have those relationships be really important. And
Yeah.
you can give your heart to someone, and you're going to hurt them, and they're going to hurt you on some level. You hope it's not
Yeah.
huge. You hope it's not like betrayal. But it's one of my other little shticks. It's like, the one thing I know about all of us is we're all annoying. God knows, we're,
Yeah.
we're all annoying. I mean, we're going to annoy people. And to be able to mature through that, I just find there's
Yeah.
no better way than that I know of than a one-to-one relationship with someone, be it romantic or otherwise.
By the way, as I'm watching the two of you, I'm thinking of the Gottmans or the Hendricks. You
Uh,
two remind me of them, in that sense, which are couples who I think have evolved into that co-creative experience of real partnership. And the way I'm observing the two of you, I think of this as like that's the ultimate in relationship, is when you can really be partners with one another. And again, it's navigating the good, the bad, the ugly, obviously, and we
Hmm.
want to have so few ugly kind of things. But the way I'm looking at the two of you as partners, that's what I want to encourage people to do, is aspire for partnership type relationships.
Yeah.
And they're confused because there's no blueprint for what that looks like in midlife. And so I just like to draw attention to, by the way, to the extent that I'm a coach, I oftentimes, you see all these books behind me, just like there's books behind you. I'm just
mhm.
referring to what I think are the best teachers out there. Read this content, learn, grow, and do it with somebody. Like, do a book club with your partner, as an example, because then
Mm,
you can grow together as well as an individually.
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I just want to say I'm not a therapist. Bruce is the therapist.
Yeah.
I'm
But
like,
we are.
you know, but we are partners in lots
Are
of
you
different.
guys, are you a sidekick? No, I'm just kidding.
Yes,
Well,
actually.
with respect
That's
to
why
this
we started.
podcast.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay, got it,
yes,
got it,
he
got it.
wanted a sidekick, and here I am.
Well, and you
No, but by
volunteered.
the way, you're sitting together, not you behind him. So you're part of his
Oh
experience.
yeah. Well, and sometimes, as I'll often say, yeah, I'm the therapist and she's the real person,
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
because I can.
Is it
as listeners
annoying?
to
Okay,
this.
really quickly,
Yeah.
Judy, is it annoying being with the therapist or, because they like to process everything?
Yes and no. I've learned a lot from Bruce, and well, when he was saying before everybody can be annoying, he usually throws in after that statement, except for Judy. Uh,
I do.
Ah,
And see that, and did you notice how nice she was about handling that? Because she could
yeah.
have said, "Oh my God, let me tell you what it's like to sit with him when we're watching a program that has a therapist." But she didn't say that, even though I know how amazingly annoying I could be about that. So no, we are.
Oh,
I
have you
think,
seen this? Have
yeah.
you seen on Showtime? There's a series called Couples Therapy.
Yes,
we
It's
tried watching
I
it.
watched it for a little bit. I had a hard time after a while.
Well, I just think, you know what, and to the extent that I'm sharing this with your audience is it's as close to being like hidden cameras of real therapy
Mhm.
sessions that I've ever seen, to some degree, and I can understand where the annoyance could come in too. Um, but it's fascinating to witness couples when you can go behind the curtain and really observe oftentimes their biggest issue. Well, first off, they're always doing this. They point the finger at the other
Mhm.
person. um, but it's interesting to witness couples really poke around in their emotional well-being, and in some cases they come out the other side happier, and a lot of
Mhm.
times they're in denial. um, I think we need to see more programs like that. We need to see more evidence of really, as you said, she's the real one. Uh, but going behind the curtain to what really happens instead of the facade that we see in movies and
Oh
television and
yeah,
things like that.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's your life,
Well,
pretty
yeah.
much.
I mean, I do tend to be. Well, here comes my nerd again. Deconstructive. I mean, the second of my three recent books that I've written is all about the process of therapy itself and how. And I try. It's called "It's Not About Communication: Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy Is Wrong."
Yeah,
It's a snarky title, and it's intended to say, a lot of the things that we think ought to go on or do go on or whatever. I'm just calling into question a little bit because a lot of it has to do with classifying people rather than or teaching them to imitate people who are doing well rather than actually inviting them to show up and be intimate with each other in ways that'll actually
yeah.
encourage growth. So
Well, it's
yeah.
interesting because, and I'm going to share with you something I say on my videos. You know, um, people often say communication is the most important facet of a relationship. Well, a lot of couples talk at each other, not with each other, is
Mhm.
one thing I've observed. But most importantly, I've observed most human beings, I'm sure you've heard the phrase feel your feelings. And we can't deny we are feeling our feelings, but I don't know if many human beings really can interpret what they're feeling, but more importantly articulate what they're feeling in a way that can be seen, heard, and understood. And even going deeper is really identifying what our needs are in a relationship. And this is where communication almost requires ninja level skills to do the interpreting our feelings, expressing it in a way that's seen, heard, and then expressing our needs. We're reaching I think our next evolution as human beings is we're invited to really get more granular in that area versus oftentimes just vomiting communication.
Yeah.
That's so true. I think that about being able to articulate your feelings, because oftentimes you might not even be aware of things. It just reminds me of like the recent Me Too movement.
Yeah.
Women were putting up with all this crap for so long,
Yes.
and then you're looking back and say, why did we put up with that crap for so long? And it's
Yeah.
because we couldn't articulate up until that time when all this stuff, it has to build up to something. And now it's like, yeah, right. And we're still
It's
putting up with it, but I think people are at least more aware now of what we were putting up with.
Yeah, but you brought up a great point. It's one thing to experience the feeling, but to really interpret it and then again articulate it in a way. And certainly in the Me Too, it was about boundaries. I saw a cute video. You might appreciate this. It's a husband and wife at a therapist office, and the woman is expressing some pain, and the husband doesn't hear. He just doesn't understand. So what the therapist does is it gives it to him in a golf analogy. And he's giving the therapist is giving an example. Do you know when you five putt on a hole that you were about to birdie? Do you know how you feel? Like that hit and despair feeling? This is the therapist kind of giving these golf analogies. And he's like,
Uh-huh.
oh, I now understand what she's going through.
Hmm.
Right.
Because she was able, and it's an interesting illustration is we can hear somebody share a pain, but we oftentimes don't even know how to internalize it
Yeah.
because it might be so different than how we interpret pain. Again, this is getting into ninja level. I think I call it ninja level. Um, Human pair bonding, which a lot of couples we haven't been educated, we haven't been schooled. This isn't taught to us. And oftentimes our role models we haven't really experienced good role models in this
Right.
Yeah.
area.
Very
So
true.
this is why, and by the way, have you read the book Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg?
I've read about it. I haven't actually read that
Oh,
particular
okay.
book.
It's a
Yeah.
fascinating example of how to articulate your need. By the way, the
Yeah.
reason why it's called nonviolent is we oftentimes communicate in a confrontational way. And the book should have been titled Compassionate Communication
Hmm.
because it's about learning how to communicate in that kind, compassionate way so that another person can actually interpret what you're feeling and what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I make reference to NVC, nonviolent communication, as an example of what I end up classifying as a bunch of really good ideas, as long
Yeah.
as you don't start treating it as ideology. Because what happens, that's why, I called my book, It's Not About Communication. Obviously, of course, it's about communication. I mean, all those things are important. NVC is a really good example of a bunch of things that are really good ideas, from my opinion,
Okay.
and lots of other people's opinion too. When you focus on doing that instead of actually communicating, then what tends to happen, and I've worked with couples that they'll start fighting about who's doing NVC wrong. In other words, the issue isn't that they don't know how to communicate. The issue is what they're communicating. And often what they're communicating is distrust and anger and condescension, and not even realizing they're often communicating condescension. Men in particular, we do that. We do that like breathing. You know that one. So that phenomenon of knowing what it is you're actually communicating, then, it often turns out you don't need the rules so much once you realize what's underneath. And the thing about the rules is you can be following all the rules of NVC and still being a jerk.
Well, yeah, because
Yeah.
it can be. I mean, and I'm in agreement with you. I like the book because it helps facilitate better
Oh
communication
yeah.
and being able to really tap into what do you need and being able to articulate that. It can also be a book, or you can use NVC in a self-serving way. It's all about my needs. It's
Yeah.
like you have to recognize there's two people in the equation usually, and it's not simply all about your needs, it's
Yeah.
also about your partner's needs as well.
Right.
That I think it sounds more commensurate to the book that you've created,
Oh yeah.
um, and
And
being
it's difficult.
mindful of that.
I often meet couples where one of them has read the book, whatever it is, maybe even
Yeah.
mine, and just needs their partner to read it too. And that's not usually going to work all that well because they're basically using the book as another way of coercing their partner into getting them to do what they want, as opposed to actually hearing what their partner has to say and why they may be resisting them. And so that's the thing. Here I am writing books too, and realizing, yeah, the reason I subtitled my book "Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy Is Wrong," I put in one of the
Yeah.
latter chapters that applies to me too. Everything I know about couples therapy is wrong, also.
Yeah.
It's the knowing. It's when we start thinking we've got the right ideas that closes us down to actually hearing other ideas.
Well,
That's when we get in
you
trouble.
said something earlier, going back to ideologies, which I really appreciate. I'm working with a client right now. It's actually a male client, and we're actually using the book Untethered Soul as
I
a
don't know that
as
one.
a launch. Untethered Soul is by Michael Singer.
Hmm.
But the first chapter is called The Voices in Your Head. It's understanding, this voice in our head. And it's almost like what we're doing together is like a book club, is we're looking at it, unpacking it, not from a place of you need to learn this. It's more like,
Mhm.
what do you think about this? What does it invoke in you? Share with me your opinions. I want to go deeper than just the surface. And I think couples who actually really look at life from that place of from a place of curiosity,
Yes, yes.
like that to me is the, like, be curious about things, and like, and share your opinions of how, in a kind way.
Mhm.
I always encourage people, speak your truth, just do it with kindness, but come from a place of curiosity, question things,
Yeah,
because
Sure.
to me that's fun. Now maybe I'm
Hmm.
just a little, neurotic in that way, but that to me is fun.
you and me
Is
both. No, that is fun. And what you're describing, and my favorite terminology is you're describing ideas.
yeah,
Ideas open up
exactly.
other ideas.
Right.
So
Yeah,
sometimes they're challenging. Sometimes they make you think thoughts you wouldn't have thought without sharing those ideas with someone.
yeah,
Ideologies shut you down. And
yeah,
it's just fascinating how any decent set of ideas can easily be turned into an ideology and it just screws it up. It becomes a caricature. But when you approach exactly as I really like how you described that. It's like you do a book club with someone. That's a way to enter into a book. And what I
yeah,
strive, I don't know if I would have said this before this conversation, but what I strive to create in the sessions I do with couples is precisely that sort of atmosphere, that sense of, wow, let's be curious about this, even when it's painful. Let's be curious about this because I almost always tell a couple in the first session, well, I can already tell that neither one of you is batshit crazy,
yeah.
which I trust they already knew.
And
Most of the time, it's in 30 years, I've met a few where I haven't, and I say this with, I don't mean to be flippant about it because
yeah,
that's like somebody's having a manic episode or something.
right.
Yeah.
But most of the time, people aren't crazy and they're not evil and they're not stupid. They're just different. And when you can enter that, and look, sometimes that means a couple says, "Oh my God, we're just not right for each other." Bummer. But sometimes it means, "Oh my God, I can discover aspects of both you and me I didn't know I had," which is, I think, what, in what we have as a partnership, as you described it, it feels a certainty to me, and I think you've said this too. You feel more of yourself, not less. You
Right.
feel like you're learning and growing all the time because you have this other person who isn't you and
Yeah.
with whom you can be curious.
So you and I feel a simpatico with you, Bruce, is that and maybe this resonates with you. Like, by the way, well, this doesn't, because I'm single out in the dating
Mm.
marketplace. And I was
Judy
in a
spared me
significant,
that. I
yeah,
was
well,
I
you're,
was single for about 10 minutes and
yeah, yeah.
she came along,
I,
but
I was in love with someone. She ended the relationship a year ago.
wow.
Um, So my passions are philosophy, psychology, human behavior, and spirituality. Those are kind of like my four key things that I'm just a bit obsessed with, kind of thing. And it's part of my work too, is to
Hmm.
encourage, awareness. And I jokingly say, I'm not looking for a unicorn, but it's going to take a unicorn to appreciate me. And so, because I'm not like a traditional male, I'm not in the world of doing, I really spend more time in the world of being.
Mm.
Hmm.
And not to suggest I don't do. I mean, I
Mm.
certainly do. But to me, these are the juicy parts of life, is to observe human beings, but more importantly, observe oneself as that
Hmm.
witness in the audience versus the actor on the stage type of thing. So I have a feeling you and I could talk. Well, for the three of us could talk for hours upon hours.
I think we could too, but but I think we need to
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
think
was going to say
ask
we're
we
about
folks
probably
there.
have
how
to
we
wrap
can
up.
get in touch with you, how folks can get in touch with you and
Sure.
help
So
us.
if you're watching the video, my name is right there. You can Google me. I have a YouTube channel with almost 200,000 subscribers. I'm very proud of that, talking about dating, mating, and relating. Um,
Hmm.
and please forgive the clickbait titles. Believe it or not, the titles are there, the search engine, for search engine purposes, but I do quite a bit talk about the importance of self-love,
Hmm.
self-regard, self-esteem, all those self words we talked about, but really encouraging personal development, self-help, spiritual work, and therapy as a way to, as a vaccination to emotional chaos, if you will.
Yeah.
And your website is?
Oh, it's my name, JonathanAslay.com. So
Okay,
Great. Well, we'll make sure to put that in the notes for this episode. Thank you
yeah.
so much for doing this.
Well, thank you for having me on. This has been a lot of fun.
it has been
Yeah,
a
it has
lot of
been.
fun.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jonathon Aslay. I know we did.
We did indeed. That was a lot of fun. So, as we said in the intro to this, go buy all of our books. I don't know what you're waiting for. And we happen to be recording this just a week before Thanksgiving, and
But
so
it's going to be after
that's right. When you're going to see it, it'll be right. It'll be in the height of the shopping season
That's
when
right.
you see this. That's
So
right.
you're
You're going
looking
to see
for
this
good-
between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Looking for good gifts. All 4 of our books make great gifts. Give Judy's book, Laria Zilber's book, to people who
Like your partner?
Yes, to your partner or to folks that they enjoy good erotic material. Give my books to anybody who just wants to have a better relationship, including yourself and your partner. My book on betrayal and forgiveness, I hope you're not giving to your partner because they just betrayed you, but you may give it to your partner because it'll help them recover, and or to yourself. And I will mention, even with respect to that, if I may, the betrayal thing isn't only for betrayals that just happened.
Right.
There's lots of folks I work with who are dealing with still feeling intense pain from betrayals that happened to them decades before, and they've estranged themselves, or even if they haven't estranged themselves. And this book can really help you get some perspective on that and actually feel better.
And it's also not only about couples betrayal. If
Yes.
you've been betrayed by a family member, by a friend, by a business partner, by an associate, if you've been betrayed by somebody in your life, it really is a very helpful book to help you get past that.
So I hope you will go acquire it. And so until next time,
Remember, be kind
don't panic.
and have faith.